So glad you're listening to Faith Works Live. My name is Rebecca Haynie, and it is always my joy to be with you. Really, of all the things that you could be doing right now, you're choosing to spend this time, well, watching whatever I come up with, which is pretty fun. And I'm glad you're a fan of adventure. We'll put it that way. It's always something new, every turn a surprise. But we truly believe that faith works. And what does it mean to be people that walk in faith? In particular in faith rather than fear. And that's been something that is more than just a clever t-shirt slogan, especially over the last couple of years. We've had real choices every day about how we choose to react. Many circumstances being out of our control. Being unlike anything that we've ever seen, perhaps in our lifetime. Some of the challenges, the fears that we have faced as men and women right here in the 21st century America, these are things ever since 2020, it has not felt normal. A lot of temptations to be afraid, quite frankly. But I think that we ought to reject all of that. I think there's lots of scripture, by the way, that backs that up. And we ought to be people of courage, people of conviction, and people who are wise and discerning, who, take care to make good decisions for ourselves and our families and our neighbors, but also to walk once again in faith and not in fear, in confidence, in boldness. And that boldness, I believe, comes from being well informed. Not to mention being reassured that you have the agency to make these choices in your own lives and for your family as well. So, how do we get informed? And how do we make sure that we maintain the ability to make these choices? That's what we're going to get into with our esteemed guests today. We have some wonderful experts from Informed Choice, Iowa. We have Lindsey Maher and Brei Johnson, and they've joined us in studio, and it is wonderful to have you ladies. I'm so glad to meet you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having us. We're
Yes.
pleased to be here.
Yes,
And
thank you.
why don't you just give a little bit about your titles, your background, and where your expertise will lie?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Brei Johnson, and I am Vice President of Informed Choice Iowa. My history is actually in marketing and graphic design, but I stay home now and homeschool my girls and
Rock on.
volunteer this. Yes, doing education and legislative work for Informed Choice Iowa in the role of Vice President.
And Lindsey?
Yes, well, thank you. I don't know if we deserve the title of experts this day and age, nor do I know if that's a good word anymore.
How much have you Googled? That's really the question.
But I am, like you said, Lindsey Maher. I serve on the legislative team. I'm a past vice president, past secretary, past board member from 2017 when we began. So my background, I guess, now is I am in the financial services arena, but before that, I was a virology major at the University of Iowa. So I have a little bit of a background in this topic. But yes, also homeschool our children as well. And then again, we have our own business in financial services. So
And Informed Choice Iowa, let's let people in on all of the details they're going to need to know. Really, you're talking about informed medical choice, questions of bodily autonomy, things of that nature. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we stay pretty focused on the vaccine issue when we started. That was just kind of the topic that we wanted to stay true to so that our members and our followers could be like-minded and aligned for that particular issue. And so our organization, what we like to champion is making sure people have all of the information available when they make decisions regarding vaccinations, but then also we advocate and we oppose mandates and we advocate for choice with those health decisions, specifically about vaccines.
Well, and I know this is a topic that's on pretty much everyone's mind now, but this organization has been around for a few years, so it's not something that was just kind of cooked up overnight in response to the things that we think about with the current scary viruses. This is something that people have been concerned about and have had good reason to advocate against things like mandates or making sure people really understand what's going on in the process of vaccination, right?
yeah, I would say, thank God we did start almost 5 years ago. We actually talk about that frequently, just how crazy it would have been to just begin during the times of COVID, because we have already started educating and developing those relationships with legislators and people at the Capitol to inform them of what is going on. So they knew they had someone at least with some information that they could go to. But that being said, a lot of us just started because we were seeing what was happening on the coasts. So, for instance, in California in 2017, SB 277 was passed. And what that bill did was it removed exemptions for going to school, and especially the religious exemption, but they also had a philosophical exemption. And then they went a step further and they made it that you cannot just go to a medical doctor for a medical exemption, but you would go to the State Board of Health.
Wow.
And they would approve whether or not your medical condition was worthy of a medical exemption. And for us, that was kind of the scary, okay, this is happening. This might be coming for Iowa because a lot of things do tend to trend that way. And so a group of people just began this organization because we wanted to make sure we had the rights to tell, anyone what we wished for our children to receive or not. And at that time, I think most of us were, I don't know if we were planning on public school or not, or private school, but that was the main avenue where we all got started, was advocating for children.
Well, and that's something that I think when the conversation is largely between adults, and you can say, all right, you make the choice for your body and I'll make the choice for mine, although that's unnecessarily controversial. Even just to say that, I'm sure, YouTube has some questions and some red flags for me. But now we're talking about children and mandates for children. And as you mentioned, that's actually been kind of the front lines of vaccine questions and objections throughout these last several years. And what I am concerned about as a mom is that in order to appease these kinds of momentary concerns and fears, we may be experimenting on our own children, or acting with a blanket sort of solution or answer that may not take into account different health considerations or danger profiles of each child specifically. So I think when we're talking about adults, a lot of these questions are still valid and worthy of consideration and debate, but in particular when we're talking about children, because we're actively involving our own hearts, right? And they don't really get the say. We're trying to care for them as well. And that just, I don't know, Bree, that adds a whole new level, I think, of caution that we ought to be doing, again, research very, very carefully before we make these kinds of decisions for someone else's body now.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of our following and our members, we were hearing that they were having a hard time finding doctors, so, they wanted the choice, and there were certain ones that they were more comfortable with than others. And, to be able to see a doctor for, growth delays or an ingrown toenail, like they had to then meet, this recommendation schedule that maybe didn't align with their beliefs, or maybe didn't, certain things they just felt the risks, to getting the vaccine for their child versus helping their child navigate the natural infection. They were more comfortable with one over the other. And so we wanted to enter into this space to advocate for those families to still have the ability to see their doctor. And as we've seen with COVID, that was just a small, and then it exploded to now, adults with different, health choices regarding the vaccine. Now they're feeling it. And so we, as an organization, wanted to come alongside those families. We saw it happening to the kids. We now see it happening to the adults. And we try to do our best to educate and advocate for people to have the freedom to make those other health choices when it comes to their children.
In addition to that, I'm just going to say, and what it comes down to is there's no one size fits all. We are not all the same. We are all uniquely made, right? Uniquely and wonderfully made. And to say that we all should get, this entire schedule, or everybody should get this one product, is just kind of asinine. And it flies in the face of science, quite frankly, because we all need to take those considerations.
Well, and since you mentioned science, we might as well get into a couple of those objections, which is right now, it's pretty easy to find slogans on all sides, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
kind of shuts
Yep.
down critical thinking and debate. So I'm not a fan of it. But how do you respond when, and I'm sure you've heard it more than most, when people say things like, well, if you're questioning vaccines, you're questioning science, or you're denying science, and then it's usually followed by you're going to kill grandma, and this is how Hitler started. So
Yep.
it goes
Yeah.
downhill really fast when we're not thinking.
Yeah.
So in order to engage critically and with respect, even amongst those disagreements or those different perspectives, we have to be able to confront them. So how do you respond when somebody says, well, what's wrong? Like, what's wrong with the vaccine? I don't understand. Isn't that just science? And this is a wonderful thing. So how could you question that? Why would you be reticent about that? That's just not following the science. What's your response to something like that?
Well, one thing that we've always done is utilize science in our arguments when we go to speak at subcommittees or committee meetings or educating people. We use science. We use the citations. We use the CDC's own website. The thing is there's science in regards to both sides, but only one side is ever truly present. A lot of the times public health has made it into, like you said, the slogans and whatnot. And that isn't necessarily helpful because they're dumbing it down to a simple marketing scheme and not actually giving us all of the information. And so we use the CDC's own website. We use the studies that are out there. We use the data that's out there to show that no, there is risks with every single vaccine on the market. And especially the COVID-19 vaccine today, but there is risks, so there absolutely must be choice because there is science on both sides. It's just a matter of which science is being presented. So we bring the science with us, and we talk about it right in front of all of the legislatures, all the legislators, but also with public health in the room.
And maybe we can get into some of that science as our conversation continues, just things that people might not know that can impact their decisions, that they need to know in order to make informed choices, which is really what we're interested in. One of the things that you just mentioned, and it just makes me smile because I don't have another option. When people say things like, well, this is the consensus of science, and 97% of all these scientists agree. Like, it's really interesting that when you're polling scientists and health professionals, you're basically trying to silence anyone that doesn't agree. So it's real easy to get consensus of the only people that you allow to speak
Yeah.
are the ones who agree with you. Funny how that works.
Yes.
And that's another, I think, level to this. I'm not sure if you want to comment on that or if that's in
Yeah.
your purview, but I'm again, as a big fan of free speech, I think that is quintessential to not just who we are as Americans, but also to be able to be thinking, wise people, free people. We have to allow freedom even for those with whom we disagree, maybe vehemently disagree. That is where the intellectual rigor of that allows us to make wise decisions, sometimes different decisions. But it's the fact that many people are being silenced if they're not speaking, and we see very powerful platforms and technology, social media platforms, things of that nature that are shutting down anything that's outside of the box that they deem is approved. That is very concerning to me, not just as someone who likes to talk a lot, but I think anyone that wants to make informed decisions needs to have that freedom of information. So that's just kind of one of my soapbox issues right now. I think we
Yeah.
need to speak out against the silencing that is occurring, even if it's, if you don't agree with that person's views. If we silence any dissent, then how on earth are we going to know? I mean, if we've seen our own experts contradict each
Yeah.
each other in the past, because that's the scientific process is to test, hypothesize, test, experiment, come to results, and then rinse, lather, repeat. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I just like to make sure I get that into the conversation.
Yeah,
That we
I
should be allowing
I do
free
think
speech.
that's really one of the unfortunate things about that we've seen happen within our society, the division that's grown, and Lindsay can talk to that. But I also think too, like when you've observed, one group of people that are following one group of science or what we would consider a narrative for this issue, then the flip-flopping and the, going back on what was the concrete science everybody's basing their decisions on. And then, to now see where we're at 2 years down the road, and the narrative and the recommendations and the science is all flip-flopping. And they shut down the discussion at the beginning. And so science historically has never been something to not challenge or discuss. I mean, there's products that have been removed that were deemed not, DDT and, so many other things that we recommended and were safe and the science proved were fine. And then later were found not to. So I think it's really unfortunate. We do this in a lot of issues, not just our issue, but we shut down the discussion, and we use labels, and, we put people in a box, and it really does kill the advancement of, coming and finding common ground and reaching solutions and being able to iron sharpen iron, and just really bring about more constructive dialogue about the issue versus just, bad, like you bad. So I don't know, Lindsay's
Not
got,
allowed.
yeah,
Not
got
allowed.
some other examples of how that's maybe can touch
Yeah.
on.
Well, I would say what we haven't mentioned is we were actually censored on Facebook this summer.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, our page was removed, and thankfully we engaged our legislators who are friendly with us, and they got on it and talked to the lobbyists for Facebook. So they were able to get our page reinstated within 4 days, which, to my knowledge, is quite quick.
Right.
But yeah, they just contended that, number one, you're battling free speech, but number two, every one of our posts almost always has a link or a citation for it, and they're almost always from the federal government's website or a study of some sort, or mainstream media. We like to post those articles as well. But I agree. I think when we just label and we just do these short memes even, we aren't engaging in conversation. And I would love to see debate be brought back to the public square. I would love to see people on both sides of an issue be able to talk freely and debate point for point, where we're at. Not just these, the only debates we really get are political ones, and a lot of the times they're scripted and you get a 2-minute answer. But we really need to bring back these processes, so that way we can really further our society and really unify it. Because,
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Well, and we, if we're trying to make informed choices, really that should be our entire goal, right?
Yep.
And that may not be the same for each and every person. But the tactic that we've taken on this show is just to present the facts as we know them, to ask the questions that we encounter, see if we can come up with good answers from a variety of perspectives, and then say, all right, you make the call.
Yeah.
You make the decision. And I think that, God trusts each of us as individuals, and that's how he relates to us as well, to get spiritual. And so I don't know. I think it's wise if a government can do much the same thing, but they have other ideas. So I don't know. They don't take my phone calls anymore. You're listening to Faith Works Live. We're going to take just a little bit of a break. We'll be right back with more from Lindsey Mayer and Brei Johnson from Informed Choice, Iowa. And we'll get into some of the science now, because that's, well, why not? Well, everybody else is. Why not? Just be trendy for a minute. We'll get into some of the science and consider some of the objections that are pretty, that are important to know, because this is hitting a lot of people where they live. So that's where we'll go next. What can we do about things like vaccine mandates? What authority do they have? And since we're in Iowa, we'll talk about the state of Iowa and much more to come on the other side. Now is the time to stand for life. For 50 years, Iowans for Life has been the longest-standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they stand strong today as Pulse Life advocates. They believe in defending the defenseless, and that's what we need now, a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life from fertilization till natural death. They advocate at the Capitol, in classrooms, at events across the state of Iowa on abortion, on family planning, on physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, basically every issue where the culture is so contrary to what God calls us to. They're standing in the gap as defenders defenders of the defenseless, and they're a voice for the voiceless because they believe in the value of life. And if you do too, sign up for their newsletter and get involved today at pulseforlife.org. That's pulseforlife.org. At FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with InnerVisions Healthcare. In unplanned pregnancy and STD situations, they offer help and hope. It's all confidential and it's all free. If women are in a crisis pregnancy situation, they know that they can get real help at InnerVisions. Free pregnancy testing, free STD testing, free ultrasounds as well to see that inner vision. Because women deserve the truth about their bodies, about their baby, about all of their options. And if a woman has gone down the road of seeking abortion through medication and she regrets that decision, InnerVisions also offers abortion pill reversal procedure, which is a life-saving, miraculous option to have right here in our own community. InnerVisions Healthcare, well worth supporting, providing those free services to women in crisis pregnancy. You can call them 24 hours a day at 515-440-2273. That's 515-440-2273. You're listening to FaithWorks Live. So glad you're here. And we're talking about, what else? Like vaccine mandates. Because I haven't been banned recently on YouTube. So, that's all I wanted for Christmas. It is my joy to be joined by some fine ladies from Informed Choice, Iowa. And you can check out their resources online at informedchoiceiowa.com. Brei Johnson and Lindsey Maher. And probably say your name like a different way every time, Lindsey. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
That's all right.
It is wonderful to have you because I love to learn things and I love to, just have open, respectful, even challenging conversation with folks, even if I disagree with them. Go figure. So when we're talking about things like vaccines and really medical choice, a lot of those conversations have basically deteriorated into sloganeering, and then people lob verbal grenades and then decide to take their ball and go home, and we're not associating very well with each other, sadly. I think we can do better. I do think we can do better. But there are serious questions, and there have been serious health concerns that we've all been learning to navigate over the last couple of years. Again, the theme of living in faith and not fear, I think, is critical, in particular for the people of God. So if you're listening to, that's where I'm coming from, cards on the table. I think that everyone should be allowed to make those choices for themselves. And I didn't think that was particularly controversial in a lot of ways. Apparently I was wrong, but I've been wrong before. It does seem like this is an area where we should stand strong, though, to protect personal choice, because if we start the ball rolling, I mean, if you talk about slippery slopes, what can't the government deem is necessary for you to do to and with your own body? That's a scary question. And that is actually one that I believe it was Justice Amy Coney Barrett brought up. If we're using emergency authorization for government control over injecting a substance into your body, at what point does that emergency end? And at what point is it, maybe it pivots a different way and now the government's been given this authority? I think these are legitimate concerns that we probably should have been asking and establishing long, long ago. But why not ask them now? So, Lindsey, I know you mentioned some of the data that you present when you're talking about these questions with people, and I'm sure you come up against opposition. But what are some of the things that you believe, the facts or the backing science, that you believe that people should know that perhaps, would be unfamiliar to them or new to them or being kept from them?
Sure. And it depends on, I guess, where you get your data and your news source from. But so some of this might be repeats for some people. But I think the big thing that people need to remember is that this quote unquote vaccine has been not found to actually stop transmission. So we are seeing breakthrough cases, right, in people who have gotten the vaccines and in the unvaccinated, right? We've seen infection in everyone. And so to say that these vaccines and therefore these vaccine mandates are going to stop the spread of COVID and stop the pandemic is just, it's not true. There's no way.
And the CDC does admit that.
Yes,
now,
in
right?
August of 2021, the director, Rochelle Walensky, went on CNN and said we are finding that these vaccines are not actually stopping transmission. We can no longer say that. technically, I don't believe they should have ever said that from the start, because how they designed the study, the phase 3 clinical trial, did not test for whether or not it actually disrupted transmission. It only tested whether or not it stops disease. And that's a difference, whether or not
So
you
the
have
manifestation of symptoms in the
exactly.
body. Okay.
Exactly. So I would say that's probably the big one. That's the first big one, because that's the argument for vaccine mandates. What is the purpose of the mandate if it's not actually going to stop transmission? All the other workers, they all have the same exact threat of being infected and passing it. So what is the purpose of the discrimination that's happening? The masking, the forced masking and testing in lieu of vaccinating, or the people who are being isolated from their coworkers. Like, there's a lot of different policies that are being put in place based on this premise that the vaccines are our savior. In reality, it is not at all. And in some cases, it's actually hurting or harming people or putting them in greater risk of developing infection.
And again, since we're talking about maintaining, again, this freedom of speech, freedom, open debate, one of the things that just really breaks my heart, if I can be quite honest, is that there have been people who have been silenced simply for telling their story.
Yep.
And for saying, these are the side effects that I experienced as a result of this. I've reported it, and the information was hidden, or it was deemed unimportant, or I lost my platform, or any of those things. Like, that they're not even allowed to speak what they have experienced. That should cause us to ask questions. That's not to say that that experience is even typical for the majority of people, but it's certainly a factor. And it does seem like if it challenges the objective, which would be utter compliance with vaccination, so we retrofit the things that people are allowed to know, or the stories that are allowed to be told based on the outcome that we believe is best, that's a problem. That's
is.
Orwellian dystopia. But since you mentioned that idea of government jurisdiction, maybe we can talk a little bit about what kinds of ways that our government here in the state of Iowa has responded to this. So we've got the several levels of adjudication going on. We've got, obviously, before the Supreme Court, very high profile and very important review of the federal vaccine mandate, which relies on OSHA to as the enforcement arm. And that's being decided. And we can get into some of the details of that as you like. But then each state has had to have some kind of response to this. And what has Iowa decided to do? What if people are listening in Iowa and they're thinking, well, what might my options be if I have questions, or I'm not sure, or I really don't want to, have to be forced to do this? What are some of those options that people should know?
Yeah, so over the course of there's been a special session and a regular session where our legislature has passed the vaccine passport ban bill. So that basically said government entities could not create a vaccine passport or distribute them. There were other things that bill also did. And then the special session said that businesses had to accept exemptions. And so our government has, made some incremental steps to try to push back on what's happening and to try and alleviate Iowans. And then in addition to the federal response, Iowa's OSHA's labor
Commissioner.
Commissioner, thank you, Rob Roberts. He also has now recently announced that Iowa is not going to be the arm of enforcement for the federal regulations. So that's terrific news. And honestly, we've seen some people that's alleviated, some of the school districts, some of the municipalities here in Iowa, and some businesses. Basically, the federal government doesn't have the bandwidth to enforce this. And so they were relying on states to step in as the component to do so. And so, since there really is no enforcement arm, a lot of people realized, that they would be able to lessen up and not, have to do some of those requirements. I won't call them law because they are not law, but it is merely recommendations and, quite frankly, an unconstitutional order given by our president. So it's not enumerated in the Constitution. 10th Amendment, I believe, states that if anything's not enumerated in the Constitution, it falls under the legal authority or the legislative authority of local governments.
Or individuals.
Or individuals, thank you, yeah. So basically, it's not enumerated, and then there's been a court also backing that up, a court ruling, Commonwealth of Kentucky versus Biden, ruled that this is a state issue. And so you have that court ruling, you have, what the Constitution says, and so that's how we should proceed forward as citizens of Iowa. And so it's terrific that the labor commissioner did that. Sitting in my seat as an Iowan, how does this though play out in everyday life? Like, these are the things that are happening in the systems, but where's the rubber meet the road? And, it's great. It gives us all a breath of fresh air, but we need to not let up on our activism, because if the labor commissioner changes, he might have a different say. If our, governor ever, changes, they might have a different say, because, they promote or they appoint, work closely with the division and the department heads.
Right.
So if any one of those components change for Iowa, we're looking at a completely different ballgame. So,
And even then, we still have the private mandates that are happening with
Yes.
private employers. And that's probably the biggest one we hear is, oh, we can't regulate private business. Because these mandates began last summer, far before, the Biden administration announced the federal mandates. And so that's an issue that's ongoing that we're actively participating in at the State House with a House study bill. We do believe there is, definitely a cause or a right to maintain individual rights versus protecting just business rights. I don't believe they wrote the Constitution just for businesses. I do actually think it was intended for us as individuals. And we have a lot of different things that have come about because of rights of an individual, right? We no longer have child workforce, right? We no longer have no limits on a work day, that we were seeing in the early 1700s. Was, just crazy working conditions in the slums of New York. And so those things have changed and have bettered, the environment, not only that, but our health as well because of those changes. And so we absolutely, I think, have a right to maintain individual rights over necessarily a business. And so it's just a matter of how you work that out. And so that's a bill we're actively working on this session.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because I know there are people that are in that position that have reached out to me, and I'm like, I'm not an expert, but I'll try to find out what I can. That since we use these term mandates, vaccine mandates, which is very broad,
Yep.
there are a few different levels at which this is happening, and I think that maybe some of that was intentional to put pressure on businesses, quite frankly, to say the government has basically threatened to fine many businesses or potentially sue them if they don't act as the enforcement arm. And then they're seeking to, if their suit is successful, get OSHA involved as that enforcement arm and put pretty onerous and burdensome fines on businesses over 100 employees. And so there are businesses that are saying, well, we have to take action. And it looks like for us, we're going to mandate vaccinations, and that puts workers in a really difficult position. So if somebody is in that position, maybe you might have some ideas about what avenues they can pursue. I would assume requesting an exemption would be a good first step.
Yeah, definitely a request and accommodation for religious or medical reasons. Supposedly with HF 902, which was the bill passed in October, you should only have to submit a statement that is written and signed by you. But unfortunately, we're not hearing that that is the case, and people are asking way more intrusive questions. So definitely reach out and find out what the accommodation process is at your place of employment. And in some cases, if you don't want the alternative, which is masking and testing and potentially paying for that testing weekly or, twice a week or whatever their company's policy is, request an accommodation from all three. There's no reason that you should be discriminated against necessarily because of your religious beliefs or because of your medical condition. So that would be step one. The other step would be then to reach out to your legislators and say you want to see action on this because you do believe that these employers are overstepping their authority to ask your personal health information that should be your private information, and where do the limits go from there? What else are they going to ask for next?
Yeah, I just want to add too, so on our website, which you've mentioned before, informedchoiceiowa.com, we also have a poll. Basically, what we saw a lot, leading up to, some of these legislative decisions, were, they just weren't hearing from their members. And so we really wanted to help advocate for the messages, whether, they were hearing them and they were going somewhere else, spam or whatever. We wanted to come alongside those members, and when we are lobbying, we can, say, well, there's been X amount of individuals here in Iowa who've, advise their legislators that they are experiencing discrimination. They've had hours cut. They've been demoted. They're, being passed up for bonuses and other, perks of the job, or they have to go into separate rooms, can't, sit, like just basically what is all these experiences from Iowans help us be the voice that of the messages and phone calls we hope that they're sharing with their legislators about these circumstances that they're experiencing in their workforce.
Well, and being able to maintain that level of agency in your life. I think a lot of people, like I've said, if the whole theme can be boiled down into one little quick memeable slogan, it's we have to live by faith and not fear. But that's real. That's a real challenge for many people, especially if you're faced with the choice of, how do I feed my family if I'm not
Right.
going to be able to have a job? And there have been many people in industries, healthcare industry is a really big one because that's been basically set apart and allowed to be mandated for some time now. And there have been people that have said, I can't, I'm not going to make this sacrifice.
Yep.
And I think that's courageous. And again, especially since these are the same people that we've been relying on to keep us healthy and safe during some incredibly strenuous conditions and scary conditions. They were the golden angels of the pandemic, and then suddenly they become the pariahs. And I don't think that that's scientific or fair or right. But they've made courageous choices. I don't believe that people should have to make those choices to say, this is what's best for my health, for my body, for my family, for my kids at this point. And now you're telling me I can't work in this town? Well, that doesn't seem very, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem free-minded. And yet that's what we're seeing, I think, more and more blatantly. I know we've got to take a little break here, but one of the things that I am very concerned about, again, because it's not worry, right? It's not sin, it's concern. It's not worry. So just I've got to skirt that line technicality. I'm concerned about the level of, maybe hatred is too strong a word, but animosity certainly, or lack of tolerance from even just being on the quote unquote you can demean someone by calling them a name, calling them anti-vax, calling them anti-science, all of those things. And you literally had an op-ed in one of the nation's premier publications saying it is right and it's good for us to dance on the graves of unvaccinated people. And I don't care who you are or what you think is right medically speaking or scientifically speaking. That's abhorrent. That's inhuman to say that. We don't talk ill. What happened to not speaking ill of the dead, first of all, but that's not a line that we can morally and ethically cross. And I'm afraid that there are people that look at that at someone's personal choice and say, oh well, can we then say, well, they deserved this? Because this has taken on a disturbingly moralistic kind of tone. And we've never done that before with illness, at least not in my memory. And I don't think that's a wise way to proceed. I'll just put it as gently as possible. But let's see where that can take us. Let's see some of the thought experiments that we're going to entertain in the remaining time that we have here on the show with these fine ladies from Informed Choice Iowa. Lindsey Maher and Brei Johnson are with us. And if you'd like to check out some of the resources they're talking about, get connected with them, find out more about their background. And if you have these questions, maybe this has come up at your job or your school, and you'd like to know, what are my options? What can I do? You'd like to reach out and connect. It's informedchoiceiowa.com. You are listening to FaithWorks Live. What does love look like? Love means serving those who are truly in need, and that is what they do at Agape Pregnancy Resource Center. That's really what they're all about, helping, loving, serving women in crisis pregnancy situations with free pregnancy testing, STD testing, ultrasounds, and so much more. For practical needs, they have turned whole lives and whole family trees. It's amazing to see what they're doing right here in our very own community for women in need. They provide free services because they believe that women deserve the truth about their bodies and about their babies. And when women know they're not alone, they can fix the crisis and carry them through the pregnancy. They empower women to choose life. And like I said, whole families are here because of the work that they do at Agape. There are many ways to get involved, practical ways for you to live out your pro-life through Agape. Get involved with their important ministry at agapedsm.com. Click the tab that says Get Involved and find out their current needs and ways that you can help meet those needs and care for women in crisis and save babies at the same time. It's agapedsm.com. When you love people, you cook them tasty food. And there is no tastier food for my money and for my family than Anonymous beef. And they are so good at what they do. It's naturally raised beef. And in fact, there's several opportunities. You've had to be on a wait list because of how good and how popular their products are. Well, now there's new opportunity right now. Act now to get your Anonymous beef. There's no steroids or antibiotics. It is all natural, farm-raised butcher beef. And you can pay processing at the locker fees. They help walk you through all of the process. It's a little bit different than going to the grocery store, but it is well worth it. You get great value for your money, and they help walk first-time customers through the whole process. Now is the perfect time to provide great quality food for your family, and it just doesn't get better than Anonymous beef. So go to their website and start looking at your order today, whether it's half a cow or freezer full, whatever you need to fit your family, they'll help you out. It's anonymousbeef.com. That's OHNEMUS beef.com. Hey, thanks for listening to FaithWorks Live. I'm glad that of all the things that you could be doing, you've chosen to come and hang out with us, and that's pretty awesome. We're talking about informed choice. I think that's a good thing. Frankly, I think it's quintessentially American, and I'm a fan. I really am a fan of both information, critical thought, context, and choice. And I don't think it's something we should be sacrificing for light or transient causes. I think we ought to be operating and being willing, especially, to walk in the realm of informed faith over fear. So of all the opportunities that we have to be afraid, let's just say no. Let's just say no. And instead, let's try to get informed. So I appreciate, especially if you're somebody who kind of finds yourself on the other side of these issues and you're willing to engage and talk about it. Like, I don't understand. Like, what's so wrong about vaccines, or why would people have objections to things like this? It seems like this is a miracle. I've heard it talked about as a medical miracle, this COVID vaccine. And I think, thank you for being with us this far and for being willing to at least engage and hear what other, again, thinking, researching, caring people have to say about this from another side. Informed Choice Iowa has been our guest representatives from Informed Choice Iowa, I should say, Brei Johnson and Lindsey Maher. And it's been one of those really interesting things, I think, especially as I look at what's good for myself, my family, trying to find out what I can from esteemed sources, people that can be trusted. Mm-hmm. And I've always been a bit of a contrarian about believing something just because I was told by, like, the argument from authority isn't necessarily good enough, but you're looking for someone who knows what you're talking about, right? And oftentimes when you get into this issue now, everyone has opinions on the internet, and because that's where you go. Like, if you have opinions, you go to the internet. The case in point. But the concern that I have is that people are just discounting one another as human beings, and they're saying, all right, well, anything that you have to say, I already know that I disagree with you, and so it has to be illegitimate. Which is where you're seeing some of the canceling and the silencing and things like that, which I have already said I believe is one of the most dangerous reactions that we've had as a society. Very concerned about that. I don't think we can allow that to stand. I think it will be very harmful for all of us if we do that. But I think there are some specific differences about this particular vaccine that have caused people rightly to question it. It is incredibly new. It is a very, it's experimental science, you could say. And one of the things that you were just talking about, Lindsay, is that this is quite different from some other vaccines just in the process that in its development process. And I think that's a worthy point to bring up, that even if people are saying, well, I don't want to be quote unquote anti-vax, but I do have questions about what might make this somewhat different. And does that increase efficacy? Does that cause, side effects? And at this point, we really don't know. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we studied it for, I mean, the Operation Warp Speed was like, it took place in all of like 6 months. So it is definitely concerning. And that was one of my bigger disappointments, I would say, of 2020 was the fact that we were, getting rid of some of the, what people called red tape, but in reality were the safety processes for testing this new technology of the vaccines, both of which, the adenoviral vector and the mRNA type really haven't been used in a wide spectrum on the human population. And both of them, adenoviral vector as well as the mRNA, were really designed for gene therapy. They were not really designed as vaccines. So to say that we should be concerned about long-term ramifications when we've never utilized it on a human population before would be, I'd say, very fair. Not to mention the fact that 13.1 on every vaccine insert in the United States in production talks about how these vaccines have never been tested for the impairment of fertility or carcinogenicity or mutagenicity, which is cancer causing. And that also equates with this one. And the number 2 cause of cancer in children or the number cause 2 of death in children is cancer, let alone the adult population. I believe it's 1 in 3 people nowadays have an issue or know somebody with cancer. So to say that we have some real concerns, I think is very legitimate, very warranted. We saw in the clinical trials, the phase 3, we saw Bell's palsy come up as a possible, adverse event that could happen, and that has happened thousands of times. If you track this information on the vaccine adverse event reporting system, you can find some of this information. But some of the other ones that have popped up are myocarditis, pericarditis, right? Inflammation of the heart. You have severe allergic reactions. You have people who are getting Guillain-Barré syndrome and becoming paralyzed. You have death. We had an injury story at our conference in November. We hold a conference every November called the Informed Conference. Just a little plug there. And we had an Iowan from the Cedar Rapids area who gave a story about her parents both being impacted by the vaccine, and one of them unfortunately passing away within 24 hours of the vaccine. So, to be concerned, I think, is very warranted.
And Brei, I know that you're seconding that. I'm seeing you nod, and I think, again, in particular, thinking about as vaccines have and the recommendations / attempted mandates have gone younger and younger and younger. You're now talking about in some places kids as young as 5. And to be experimenting with that precious a population, I don't think that's a line that we should be crossing. In particular, I mean, when you throw in the fact that we know that SARS-CoV-2 has not been particularly deadly or concerning for children in that age group, but thank God, unusually so for this type of virus. Kids don't suffer from COVID, but to put them then at risk of adverse effects, side effects, could be life-changing or life-threatening. I just don't see that is very wise. We don't have, in my opinion, we don't have the data to support that. I think parents are right to be concerned, but maybe they don't know exactly what they can do about any of that in maybe more pro-lockdown states. they're being faced with all kinds of mandates and regulations just to send their kids to school. And that's those are fighting words where where I come from. And I'm like, no, that's not how we do things. That's not how this mama rolls. But there are a lot of parents that think I just have to go along with this, and I think that hopefully there's something that you find that's empowering to parents. What kinds of power should parents be able to have with their children's health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when the mantra is safe and effective, that's what people are indeed led to believe. And then, couple that with exemptions, not really even being talked about by the schools. So people don't really know that Iowa does recognize religious and medical exemptions for their kids to go to school if they're opting not to do something on the childhood recommend CDC schedule. So I just want to point out that the federal government has paid out $4.6 billion for over 8,000 injuries since 1988. So that compensation is capped at a number, and so those individuals are being paid out that cap number. That cap number hasn't increased since the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act was passed in 1986. So it's a really old, outdated payout compared to inflation, compared to what is it? Is it
For deaths, it's 250,000.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's what each family gets paid out. Now, these injuries are also being reported to VAERS. And so a lot more, thankfully, a lot of people have learned more about VAERS and the injury reporting system. But historically, that system, only 1% was actually being reported. There's a couple studies out there that have consistently pulled up the underreporting percentage to that injury system. I think with COVID, that number's probably gone up because people are more aware, which is a good thing, but it's still well below what we need it to be as far as actually capturing what the injury picture looks like, the lay of the land. If you look at vaccine injury numbers reported on a chart, like it's low, and then COVID is rolled out and it just spikes astronomically. And so the government, because of the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, was shielded pharmaceutical companies and healthcare workers from being held liable for those injuries. And so, honestly, the only people that have recourse, the only entity that people have recourse now against is their employer for mandating it. So, if there are no protections against these mandates, it's going to hurt our employers too. And so that's, one thing that we continually, want to draw awareness to is the lack of liability for pharmaceuticals and individuals bringing this out. But I also too want to just talk briefly too about a piece of legislation that Representative John Jacobson and Representative Mark Cisneros is working to put forward. And basically, this piece of legislation will prohibit discrimination. And basically, people cannot be denied services. They won't be able to incentivize or disincentivize employees. It cannot affect an individual's employment, and it also prohibits segregation based on privacy rights. It also keeps people's health information to them. And so it comes at and protects Iowans from the discrimination that we're seeing happen, as well as, the privacy, the commodity of their personal health information, which is perpetuating these mandates and really what gives them the ability to enforce it. If you give them your personal information, what your status is, they're going to use that. So I just wanted to make Iowans aware of that, because that would be an excellent piece of legislation that's being put forth this session.
It's called the
to
Medical
protect
Privacy and Freedom Act, in
Yes.
case anybody wants to know. So
Yeah.
if you want to talk to your legislator about it, that's the name of it currently, because we don't have a number yet.
Yes.
The Medical Privacy and Freedom Act?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Good to know.
Yes.
Yep. So if we can get that passed here in Iowa, it will really shore up and secure a lot of the concerns and issues that people are having in their workplace. So,
But I think that also goes to your question too about about children. You know, they are entrusted to us, right, to make the decisions for, to be their teachers, whether that's biblical or whether you want to just think about that as a parent. But we, just like individual choices, we have to make those right. We have to look and research and get the decision to make the decisions. And so there's a lot of resources out there to make people feel comfortable and confident. I think there's a lot of groups out there that you can follow with like-minded people that would have resources to follow. And I think from anything, if you've followed different amounts of information out there, there's early treatments that are working for this virus. So what don't we know about some of these other diseases that we've been vaccinating for, that we've had science develop for the last 20 years? That's new information that we haven't actually utilized yet, and that we've just been, same old, let's just keep the schedule and vaccines are good. Amen. Like we don't have to question anything anymore. When in reality, like measles, for instance, vitamin A. Vitamin A is a great treatment for measles. Things people don't know, but those are things we should be
Can
talking
you
about.
patent that? Can you patent vitamin A?
That's exactly the question. There's science on that too.
Well, and I think the only way that we're going to be able to pursue these new avenues, to me, we should look at that as very exciting. And if anybody is scientifically inclined, if they are, if they want to ask these questions, we shouldn't be stifling that. We should be saying, let's look at everything, all the myriad ways that we can help our fellow man based on the resources that God has given us. Like, let's explore every possible option, right? Let's not
Yes.
just find one solution and try to cram it down on people and then focus all the efforts on, stigmatizing and basically demeaning the people who don't want to comply just because they have these questions. I think, and honestly, I think that if the authorities in power were interested in, I think, promoting if not acceptance, then at the very least, people would be more willing to be open if they said, okay, well, this is what we know right now. Let's see where this takes us. Let's further, this is the best of our knowledge right now. But let's continue to pursue these questions. Let's think, let's discover, let's experiment, let's test, and let's look at other options. Let's look at alternatives. I mean, really, that was, and I still think could be, the beauty of America, not just America, but minds from all over the world, united as they have been toward one thing. And if we could find that motivation, I think, to care for and to take that concern of our neighbor, and to find those resources that we might have just at our fingertips if we start asking these questions. But that begins with the ability to freely ask.
Yep.
It begins with the
Absolutely.
ability to freely choose, freely decide. And so I'm a big fan of Informed Choice of Iowa. Brei Johnson and Lindsey Mayer have been our guests. It's a delight to have you. Thanks for challenging us today. And if people have questions, they have feedback, or maybe a situation, and they're thinking, I don't really know what to do. Could you guys help or provide some resources? The website is informedchoiceiowa.com. Thank you, ladies, for coming in today.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for listening. Again, if you have questions, feedback, concerns, if you think, oh, well, you really should have asked this question, I'm like, yeah, probably. Probably I should have. So tell me what the question is I should have asked, or things I should consider. Also, I'm a big reader. So if you think I need to read up on the subject, send it on in. Love to see it. Love to hear it. But it is, once again, always a joy to be with you. This is about the time that we have to say goodbye. But never fear. We'll be back again next time on Faith Works Live.